I'm Chief Tom Hackney, Chief of Detectives with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. I'm going to recover some of the facts from our officer-involved shooting from last night. At 2:06 a.m., officers were dispatched to 140 East 5th Street to a 911 call that had been received regarding a man who was threatening to commit suicide. The officers arrived at 2:13 a.m. As the officers arrived, the response to the 911 call was about a friend, and I'll put that in quotes, who was going to cut his wrist, who was upset over his wife, who may have a knife. Officer B.E. Turner, who's a 4-year veteran with the Sheriff's Office, and Officer J.B. Waddell, a 6-year veteran with the Sheriff's Office, were the two officers that responded. At 2:13, when they arrived at that location on 5th Street, at the actual residence where the call was received, they noticed a male upon the porch. The male had something shiny in his hand. The officers had exited their car, ordered the male to drop what was in his hands, show him what was in his hands. That male had a firearm in his hands, had a laser sight on the gun. The male took 2 steps towards the officers, began to raise that gun up at the officers, pointing at the officers. Officer Turner fired 1 shot at the subject after repeatedly telling him to drop what was in his hands, what turned out to be the gun. The 1 shot struck him in the chest. The subject was transported to Shands Hospital, where he currently remains in critical but stable condition. However, since then, our investigation has revealed a few things. That the subject involved in this, who is William Leroy Haynes, a 41-year-old white male, was actually the 911 caller himself. He posed as a friend of his, made the 911 call. He turns out was upset about the breakup with the mother of his child. This occurred earlier in the year. In March of this year, he was actually Baker acted for suicidal threats as well from that same address on 5th Street. Earlier in the night, before the officer-involved shooting, before he made the 911 call, he texted the mother of his child, telling her he was going to commit suicide. Again, he has previous history of being Baker acted for suicide threats in March of this year. This appears that it is at least an attempt of a suicide by cop. The gun was recovered on the porch where the male was. It turns out that this was a BB gun. However, it looked very authentic. There's been a photograph which will be electronically provided to you. This is a photograph of the gun that was recovered. Again, this is a BB gun. It's not an operable firearm. However, you can see from the description in the photograph here that it looks like it. It did also have an operable laser sight on the front. The officers reported not only seeing the shiny object being the gun, but the laser sight and the gun being raised at them. The subject, Mr. Haynes, has been charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault for pointing the gun at the police. And as per our policy with officer-involved shootings, both of the officers involved have been placed on administrative leave. I can answer a few questions if you have any.
Has any of these officers been involved in a police-involved shooting before?
This is both of the officers' first officer-involved shooting.
And both officers, I guess, are considered, even though only 1 officer actually fired?
Only 1 officer is actually considered to be the officer involved in the shooting. The second officer, this is on a case-by-case basis, depending on what it is and the proximity to where they were involved in it. In this particular case, both of these officers were placed on administrative leave.
Which one shot?
Officer Turner.
Turner. Was that laser deployed when he raised the gun?
Yes, the laser on the gun was on. They identified him with something shiny in his hand. Noticed that what it appeared to be, and keep in mind this is 2 o'clock in the morning on a dark Springfield street. They did have them illuminated from their spotlights of their police vehicles. Noticed that it was a gun, that it did have the laser on as it started to come up. Commenced the crime of aggravated assault. They're in fear for their life.
Any other questions?
How confident are you it's a suicide by cop situation?
You can never get inside one person's head to know for sure. But here's an incident where the person knew to expect officers to come. He made the call himself, made the threat that he was going to hurt himself to get the officers there. Once the officers were there, he not only armed himself with something that looked like a gun, raised that gun, deployed a laser sight, and failed. Again, Mr. Haynes is in control of this whole thing. He's in control from the time that he made the 911 call to the time that he armed himself with what appeared to be an authentic gun, to the time that he raised it, also to the time that he repeatedly failed to drop that when ordered to do so by police.
This is the 2nd time I've heard suicide by cop this year. I mean, there's a lady in Clay County recently. That's something that doesn't happen often, does it?
It doesn't happen often, but it's a phenomenon throughout the nation where, somebody who's going to want to do this, to intend on killing themselves, may not have mustered up the courage to do it, and it falls upon the police, or they'll put the police in a situation where the police, to protect themselves, will use deadly force.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Chief.
Thank you.